moved in with my stepfather, who was extremely violent in many different ways to both of us. And why then, therefore, picking up alcohol, which was my first drug at 12, seemed like a good idea because it was a stress reliever, because I was living in an environment of being on eggshells, of having no ability to control what happened to me. I developed techniques to try to minimize the risk of abuse or reduce it, but it was out of my control ultimately. And so alcohol was just this, mood lightening event and giggles with my girlfriends and having a good time. And so it seemed to help at first. It wasn't in a bubble, it wasn't in a vacuum. It was, this is solving my problem. It seemed to be a solution and not a new issue. But of course, it didn't stay that way. And so I moved on, pot, pills, acid, and then my drug of choice, meth, at 16. And I started shooting meth at 17, and I was in full bore addiction in high school. So that's sort of and then I went to college, I did better, but senior year of college, started using meth again, 10 more years. Didn't get sober until I was 32 years old.
Wow, that's impressive. That's actually very impressive that you were able to. Were you functioning at all? I mean,
When the 3.5 years of college, I did better. I mostly used on the weekend, mostly used alcohol, a few other things. But I had a really bad multi-assailant rape in college and then a violent boyfriend, and I couldn't hang on anymore. And so in January, when I started using meth again, the downhill slide really started over. And so, no, I wouldn't call myself functional. I held jobs, but I had a Berkeley degree and good grades, and every job was less money and less responsibility, and I held it for less time because I was using. I remember interviewing for a job and being really happy because in the bathroom stall there was a shelf and I could put my spoon on it to shoot up. And so this is my mindset around work. Oh, this is a good job because there's a shelf in the bathroom where I can rest my spoon. So by the time I was 32, my last job was work processing, and I could only hold on to that for 9 months. And my body was breaking down. I mean, all those years of meth, that's creating physical problems, but mostly I was just beyond exhausted. I mean, I was so depleted, so emotionally drained, so physically drained. I couldn't move. I was really beyond even putting pen to paper to try to apply for another job. And my partner was done with me. I mean, he couldn't take it anymore. And so for all those reasons at 32, it seemed like, well, maybe I should give rehab a try.
I agree. I think that was a good decision. And personally, I got sober when I was 28. I went into rehab. For me, I was very much self-will reliant in the aspect of I want to do what I want to do, and I'm going to try to get sober on my own, right? That was my thing is I just so what I mean by looking back on it, it sounds totally absurd, but my goal was to get sober in the same environment that had been contributing to me getting high. And ultimately, that never worked. Knowing what I know now about complex trauma, PTSD, that just wasn't going to happen, right? My thing mirrors yours in the aspect of was dealt a lot of traumatic experiences growing up, and realizing it going through therapy, and I still go to therapy to this day, right? And I love therapy. I have learned that my way of escaping was drugs, right? Was
Right.
alcohol because I couldn't go anywhere. I didn't I was terrified of the world, right? I mean, I was in my safe space that was unsafe, right? So what did I do? My first love, right? Which was alcohol, painkillers. I mean, heroin, cocaine, right? Those were my things, cocaine, stimulants. Now, I will say this, I never got into meth, and I'm super glad I never got into meth, right? Because from what I've been told, meth is one of those drugs that is very, very difficult to put down and to keep put down, right? Now, that just may be a myth or whatever, but I've heard from people who have stopped using it who have said that this is a very difficult drug to stay off of, right? And I've been to Crystal Meth Anonymous. I've hung out there and been with some friends. So Crystal meth is a serious, serious drug.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I call the book Junkie to Judge is because there I mean it is it's a harsh drug. It's a very addictive drug. I used it for a long time, and there's in the media sometimes it's not presented as it's difficult to get sober, but it's impossible. Like these people, it's too late for them. They're too far gone. And so I use the junkie term for multiple reasons, but one of them was to really own that I was there. Like when you see that person on television who's looking trashed and is shooting up drugs, and that's who I was. And then I was able to get sober, and I was able to get into law school at 6 years sober, and I was appointed a federal judge at 20 years sober. And it's really a shorthand way of saying junkie to judge that no matter how far deep into the addiction they have, that there's still hope and you can still recover and your future can be bright. It's still possible because I was her and I did it. And the truth is, I'm not that special. If I can do it, I believe, everybody can, with help, with guidance, with support.
And that's something that I picked up on, right? Is you got sober at 32 years old. So if you got sober at 32 and then you went to law school 6 years later, and that must mean you were 38 when you went to law school, right? So that to me really dispels a myth and a belief that a lot of folks have in even in recovery in life, right? Oh, I'm too old to do this, right? Or I've too much, right? Oh, I should have gotten sober younger, right? That's a common thing I hear, right? Why didn't I get sober when I was 20? Why didn't I get sober when I was 18, right? I knew I probably should have stopped. Well, you did what you did. You're here now. But your story is not only did I get sober later in life, right? Not even later, relatively early in life, right? I mean, let's be honest about that. But you also you managed to go to law school in your late 30s and become a federal judge decades later. I mean that is impressive.
Yeah, and I will say I had the same feeling when I got sober. I thought 32, I thought I was old. And I thought I had wasted my education. I mean, I was embarrassed to even think about trying to explain my work history, which was a mess. And I felt that yes, my life could improve, but that there would be sort of a limit. I could get better, but only to a certain point. And that was my mindset in early recovery. But what happened really, it's not as if at any point in early recovery, I thought, I want to be a judge one day. It's really about what's my right next step and what can I do to prepare myself for that next step. So professionally, right? For me, when I got home from rehab, my first job, even with my Berkeley degree, was a part-time temporary low-level admin job because that's all I was ready for. I was 32 and I had never gotten up on time every day and gotten to work and stayed the whole day and not left early because I was sick and done a good job and gone back the next day and the next day and the next. I had never done it at 32. So I needed to be realistic with where I was and just accept that I needed time to get in that rhythm, to get that habit, to get that to be normal. And then my second job was a mid-level permanent administrative job. And then my third job was a supervisory job, and I got a promotion, and then law school at 6.5 years sober. So it was really just about being realistic and patient with what I was ready for, and then getting prepared for the next thing. I mean, when I left that part-time temp job, I had a good reference. I'd never left a job with a good reference. I mean, realistically, never. And so that was a big step forward, and that got me the permanent job. And it was like that. It was one step leads to the other. Months go by, years go by. It's amazing what you can accomplish in 5 or 10 or 20 years. It's incremental movement forward, but it adds up over time.
And I've thought about that myself too. I was matter of fact last week I was thinking about how if I had told myself 5 years ago that I would be here in 5 years, it would have exceeded my expectations, right? It would have exceeded what I thought could happen. Really, I mean, I was hoping to just maybe have a business, right? I mean, that was shooting past the stars, right? That was in the galaxy. And I do have my own business now, and I'm also the president of a newspaper, which is really cool. I mean, yeah, I just never would have thought that that would have led to that, and how I went from doing this to that to starting off at a halfway house, right? I was like you in a lot of ways, right? I did not. I had been using drugs and alcohol since I was 14 years old. I didn't know how to live life, period,
Yes,
let
yes.
alone sober, right? That scared me. I mean, I remember specifically being high and trying to come off, and being like maybe 4 or 5 days out of just like extreme willpower. This is what I'm going to do. And then the fear of life came up to me. And on one hand, I knew that I could not stay I couldn't keep getting high, and I knew it was killing me actively, but I also was terrified to be sober. I mean, really, it just, I cannot explain the fear that I felt of being completely unmedicated throughout the world. I truly thought that this is what I need. I'm special, right? I need to have the drugs and the alcohol because I just can't deal with life, right? And I realized that that's not true. I can deal with life, and then I can accomplish a lot, and I can do all these things, and I can grow and I can learn. And your story really just touched on that for me. And this is a very personal thing for me because I can really relate to that. And anytime I see somebody who has been in my situation, or I've been in your situation, it's kind of like a family thing, right? Where I'm like, go. I want to see you succeed. I want to see people in recovery, and everybody, but specifically people in recovery, just go out there, do their thing. Ryan Hampton, he's a big guy, right? I've been on. I went to the conference, the Mobilized Recovery 2022 conference. That was an amazing event. We're all connected all across the world, all across the nation, and stuff like this really just makes me realize that we can do anything we set our minds to. And these are the stories that people need to hear, because this is a podcast that is about Chatham County issues, right? Chatham County is a county in North Carolina, and it's a rural county, as is most of North Carolina. Our county is experiencing a major job growth boom, right? We have VinFast coming in. We have two mega sites, right? We have Wolfspeed. We have these major corporations coming in, and they're building here, right? But we have such a lack of addiction services. We have such a lack of mental health services. And as is the case for most counties, we need significantly more. We need rehabs. We need detoxes. We need more programs. I mean, we don't have any really free programs. Um, we have a couple. We have Celebrate Recovery. We have AA. We have NA, but we need more. And one of the reasons why I invited you on here is because I like to get an outside perspective, right? And you have experience in this field specifically from something that we don't really have, which I believe is imperative, which is more from a secular side of recovery, right? I hate to say that, but that's almost kind of the truth. And I think you know what I'm talking about, because 12 step is traditionally very much higher power based, right? And look, I mean, I got sober in 12 step. I still go to AA meetings and I love my 12 step. However, I also understand that we need all pathways. We need agnostic, right? They have agnostic AA and everything. So my question to you, and I want to get your input on this, is what do you think Chatham County can do, a rural county in North Carolina in the United States, can do to improve our access to addiction care, addiction resources, and help the people of this county who are suffering immensely with drug addiction?
Well, I will say on the multiple pass side, and I wasn't I'm not a 12-step person. It wasn't the right fit for me. I was exposed to an impact at rehab. They told me that's all there was. So I did read all of the 12-step books, a big book, the NA text, and I looked for ideas that were useful, but fundamentally it wasn't the right fit. And so when I got out, I did research. It was 94. So I have 28 years sober. And so I had to go to the library because there was no Google. Okay. So, and I found the options. Women for Sobriety, which still exists. Rational Recovery exists a little, but it's basically Smart Recovery now. And SOS, Secular Organization for Sobriety, exists a little, but its offspring, Life Ring Secular Recovery, is much bigger. I'm on the board for Life Ring. And I will say a couple things about multiple paths. One is that even people that have faith, like Life Ring, it's Life Ring Secular Recovery. Our philosophy is about self empowerment. We don't believe that that we are powerless, but rather that we need to fight for our recovery. We also believe that plans should be individualized because we're all different, and what we need and what's going to work for you and for me might not be the same. But given that we don't require a higher power, there's no religion in meetings, we still have a very high percentage of our members have personal, spiritual, or religious beliefs, because people can be uncomfortable with 12 steps for other reasons besides just higher power. A lot of people don't like the powerless aspect. A lot of people aren't comfortable with the sponsor side or the focus on defects instead of the focus on building up competency, which is what we focus on. Now, don't get me wrong, I too support 12 steps when it's the right fit. I mean, a lot of people like the structure. A lot of people find the faith aspect helpful. A lot of people find the wide community helpful, and that's great when it's the right fit. But there are other options that people should know about so that they can look into them and find which program will fit them best. And as far as your area, LifeRing is on the internet. We have about 85 Zoom meetings. People can access them. All the other programs I mentioned have online meetings. And also know that for LifeRing, and I'm also on the board for She Recovers, we do not require an exclusive commitment to LifeRing. Many LifeRing members go to other types of meetings as well. So if a member is going in person to a 12-step meeting in their community, because LifeRing isn't there, and also doing LifeRing online, LifeRing is fine with that. If whatever works for you, whatever will build the best recovery foundation for you, we support it. You don't have to hide in LifeRing that you're also going to AA. So it's not an either or proposition from our point of view, which sometimes makes people feel a little more comfortable to check it out, to see what ideas they might want to grab and implement. And so for me, it's all about making sure people know they have options so they can find the right fit, so they can have the best chance of success.
That makes me so comfortable. I mean, because I can just tell you that from my personal experience, I have been I go to all different types of meetings. I'm kind of in a similar boat, right? Is I pick what works for me. And what works for me is different aspects, right? I mean, I'm one of those guys that I will try almost anything as long as it's safe and it meets ethical guidelines, right? That's my goal is I want to if something works. And I relate a lot to actually Bill Wilson because if you go back and you even read the big book, you can see how Bill was just a guy trying to stay sober, right? He just didn't want to die, right? And it's just so funny how you go back and you look at those books and you see, oh, I can get down with that guy. I might not agree with what happens now, but back in the day, it seemed like, hey, I don't want to die. I don't want to go to insane asylum. So let's try this. Cool, this doesn't work. I mean, Bill Wilson famously, allegedly, and I don't know if this is true or not. I'll have to look into it, but was supposed to be trying to recreate his spiritual experience on LSD, right? So, but what I like about that mindset, if it did happen, is he wants to improve. He wants to try different things, and that's what I like about Life Ring too. And I've heard about Life Ring as well. Is that it's almost an evolution, right? You can do whatever you want to do. We're not going to sit there and say, no, it's only secular. You can only be an atheist if you're here. That's it, right? That's all. No, that's not the way it
Yeah.
is, right? And that's fantastic. And that's teaching me stuff that I didn't even know. And I think it's going to be beneficial for the crowd and the people who are listening to this because that's something that we can expand. Um, I'm on an advisory board for the Chatham County Public Health Department's action team for people suffering with substance abuse and behavioral health issues. and we advise on, we're a group that gets together and we do things in the community, right? And I'm always looking for different aspects, different things we can implement. We're looking at this next year, we're going to really be taking off and doing different things in our community to try to help address some of these issues, right? Whether that's starting groups, whether that's looking at life ring, looking at sheep recovers, other avenues so people can have. Because I mean, I'll tell you right now, I'm in Celebrate Recovery too, right? I love that. That's like Jesus, you know. However, like I said again, I know that we need everything. I mean, I think we need more. We need she recovers. We need he recovers. We need life ring. I mean, this is something that is killing people in mass, and we need to throw whatever we can throw at this to try to stem the tide. And I'm super, super glad that you're out here advocating and sharing your story, because we need more of that so that when someone's online struggling, is in the depths of addiction, and they're ready to get sober, they can reach out for help. And honestly, I would love to look into, I'm going to look into LifeSpring more. And I've heard about it when I lived in Asheville. I lived in Asheville for a couple years. I actually got sober in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a beautiful city. And I went to a place called Sunrise Recovery and Wellness Center, I believe. It's called Sunrise. And the place is a wonderful spot. It's a nonprofit. It's all peer led, peer run, and they offer resources to the community. It's like a hub, and it's completely non-denominational, right? It's just peers helping peers, right? I mean, talking about, doesn't matter if you just got out of prison, jail, you're welcome there. Doesn't matter if you're using, as long as you don't bring drugs on the property. But we have had people there, because I interned there, and we had folks come in who would nod out, right? And we'd have to say, hey, you have to stay awake. We'd have to say no, no drugs here. But we have people who were actually on the streets. And what that does is create a community center that really benefits people in that area. And I mean, honestly, I could see something like that flourishing here in Chatham County. So I appreciate that. Can you tell me a little bit more about LifeRing and maybe the other board that you're on?
So LifeRing's philosophy is around what we call the three S's, and it's sobriety, secularity, and self-help. And I will say, on the sobriety side, what we mean by that is sober from all drugs, including alcohol, because when I say drugs, I always mean it, including alcohol. But except that LifeRing is, if you're taking medicine that is medically indicated and taken as prescribed, that counts as sober for us. So medication assisted treatment is a consistent with LifeSpring sobriety definition. But any medication that a doctor prescribes for mental health, for pain, whatever it might be, we do not get between the member and their doctor. But it is taken as prescribed, is an important caveat on that. And then the secularity is just, out of respect for all faiths and none, no religion in the meetings, but personal religious beliefs, we have no opinion on that at all. And then self-empowerment is around that focus on that you're responsible for your own recovery, that your success is based on your motivation and your efforts. And I always emphasize, it doesn't mean alone. It means with the group is there to offer support and guidance. And so in a LifeRing meeting, there's actually crosstalk. Members can talk to each other. There's a convener there making sure it's positive or neutral and stays on track. But for example, in a LifeRing meeting, you could say to the group, I'm going to go to my first work event with alcohol on Friday. Who else has faced the situation? How did you handle it? What suggestions do you have? And there'll be a discussion. But it's only suggestions, because what worked for you might not work for me, but it's still a good source of ideas and a good source of information. And it builds camaraderie in the group, because you're sort of sharing your knowledge and your experience. And so that's a little different. Another aspect of LifeRing that's a little different than 12 steps is that we don't require that members identify themselves as an addict, that they agree that they have a disease or a disorder, or it's a habit, or that they track time. A lot of members do these things, but it's an individual decision. Is this helping you? It's your choice. And I use the example for me about, I'm Mary Beth and I'm an addict. In the beginning, I thought it was important to say it over and over again, to kind of beat it in my brain. but by about 6 to 8 months, I wasn't comfortable with it anymore. I felt like I was saying it like it's the number one thing about me, and it really wasn't. It wasn't getting to the core of who I was. It wasn't really reflecting where was in my recovery. And so I got less comfortable. And then I found Women for Sobriety, and their introduction is, I'm Mary Beth, and I'm a competent woman. And I love that. So that's where I switched over to. And I use that as an example of what works at one point in your recovery may not be helpful later. And so part of the personal recovery plan aspect of LifeRing is that what we need changes over time, and what works for us changes over time. But also, my recovery plan on day one, I should eventually achieve some of my initial goals. So now I can work on other things. And so the plan will change because you've had success and you're ready to attack something new. And so those are some of the key ideas.
That sounds amazing. I mean, all these things sound wonderful. And I can imagine that it's got to be wonderful to be able to look back and see how your life has progressed. I mean, you had these horrific experiences happen to you when you were younger, this amount of trauma, and you were able to get sober, stay sober, and build a life to the point where now you're on these advisory boards advising major programs. I mean, LifeRing is one that really sticks out for me because I heard about it a few years ago, and I heard about how there's a lot of excitement in the field. Uh, it was just amazing. I mean, I'm also a certified drug and alcohol abuse counselor. I actually counseled for a year and a half. I was a substance abuse intensive outpatient facilitator at a mental health clinic in Little Washington, North Carolina. And talking to folks. We had group 3 nights a week, and it was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we would sit there and we would talk, and I would use plans. I would write PCPs. I would write notes. I would write all of these different aspects, write personal care plans for my clients, and I can tell you that hearing them speak and hearing them talk, there was a line of similarity that went through, and there were also folks who certain things, right? A lot of my guys and girls, right, whatever they identify as, disliked 12-step models, right? They disliked it because they couldn't do this, or they they didn't want to be forced into this or that. And I always thought, wouldn't it have been nice if there was more of a readily available source for them where it was easier to access, right? Because right now you still there's not if you're really suffering and you don't know anybody who has been to treatment or knows anything about AA or NA or anything like that, it's very hard to get into a program like that. And regardless of that, I was one of the people that my when I first started the pre-contemplative stage of getting sober, I went to a certified drug and alcohol abuse counselor. And I mean, I would go in there, I'd be high, I'd be nodding out and everything. And she gave me a list of NA and AA meetings, right? You know, and even then I knew that I needed more than that. I knew I needed some form of structure, some form of rehabilitation, and I just the idea of socially anxiety inducing going into a group full of people that you don't know and saying, "Hey, I need help." That is sometimes the hardest thing for anybody to do. I mean, because you're number one, you're admitting, right, on some level that you're having to humble yourself, right? You're saying, I need help. This thing that I'm dealing with, I just do not have the resources right now. I just don't feel like I can accomplish this, right? And number two, you're having to ask a bunch of people that you don't know. So the whole entire thing is very much the opposite of what someone normally would do, right? I mean, it's very, especially in our society as Americans, we're a very individualistic, I think that's how you pronounce it, uh, country, right? So we focus on the individual. We do not take into account the whole person in general, right? The whole person and their family. In other cultures, a lot of Asian cultures, they will have more of a family dynamic. but we really focus on the individual. So going and asking for help is very, very, very difficult sometimes for folks. And it was for me. And I think, and I'm so glad that we're changing, we're growing, we're evolving on this, because that's something that we could use. And just to hear that there's more groups coming out there. There's more people who are stepping up. Smart recovery being one of them. I mean, I've been to smart recovery meetings, and it was a refreshing take to hear a complete opposite, right? Of, write the post-it notes and, put those everywhere, and not focused on the higher power God aspect, right? Even though that's what I subscribe to now, I still appreciated that back then, and I still appreciate it now because I realize how important it is. And in volunteering, I think that's important. I think these are all important aspects to my recovery. So, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do on a daily basis to stay sober? Do you feel that you've just been in a place of neutrality where you're good now? What does your day to day look like, and do you still experience cravings?
So I have never really struggled with my sobriety since about year three. I mean, but don't get me wrong, I don't forget either. I mean, I'm very aware of how it was. I draw a pretty hard line. I don't even do desserts with alcohol in them. I mean, it wasn't my favorite drug, but I certainly abused it when I did it. And I'm very, very careful with medication. And it's funny because I have 28 years, and somebody asked me recently, and it comes up once in a while, and they've said, well, you have 28 years, can't you have a beer? And but see, this is what would happen. Okay, I know myself. If probably nothing bad would happen the first beer, but what it would do is it would make me start thinking, well, how often could I have a beer and it would be okay? Well, if I could have a beer every once in a while, I could probably smoke weed. That would be all right. What if I did meth just on my birthday? Like, would that be? This is how the mind would start spinning, right? And so I haven't struggled, but I've never really lost the connection to what that was like. I mean, the joy of recovery. Look, the judge thing is an accomplishment and it stands out as a marker, and I'm proud, but it's not the most important part of recovery. For me, the most important part is that lack of chaos and the lack of obsession. The lack of spending my time focused on this one thing to the exclusion of pretty much anything else. It's so nice to have my brain space available to do things like go to law school and be a good wife and work on my interpersonal skills, which were crap when I got sober, and all the other things. So I remember, I do believe for me, I like the hard line. It's easier to maintain for me than to wiggle on the edges. And I do think that if I were to pick up again, I see it going bad in a relatively short time because I just see the negotiation starting. So I haven't forgotten, but I don't need to take steps on a daily basis. The bigger long-term issue for me is the trauma that you alluded to, because I had PTSD when I got into recovery and I didn't know it. And I had severe anxiety and I didn't know it. I thought my negative thinking, my fears, my belief that any little mistake and all my accomplishments would explode and blow up and be gone. I thought that was like realistic and proportional to the risk, but it wasn't. And it took a long time for me to even understand that I had PTSD. And it took me a lot longer to work on that and to get it, as I say, mostly recovered. I'd say I'm probably 95% better at this point, but it took me over 10 years to really get like even 75 or 80% better. So that was the harder recovery, and it took longer, and I still struggle with it. I just the episodes are less frequent and they're briefer and they're not as intense, but I still do have a tendency in that direction that I have to manage. So but it's understandable because the trauma was first, right? The trauma is older than the substance use disorder. So for me, the management is more focused on the mental health management, the anxiety management, than the substance use management.
And honestly, what they say typically is there is a reason why you use drugs, right? This is what people say, right? Obviously, addiction is addiction, and it's just there's a genetic component, right? So no matter what, there's that genetic component in some folks, not in everybody. But like you said, right, the trauma thing, out of all the people I've talked to, I cannot tell you one person who does not, who suffered with addiction issues, alcoholism issues, had no trauma, right? Almost everybody did. And the people that say they don't, for the most part, they might not know what really has impacted them. Honestly, this is my how my thinking has changed. I used to think I was the only one. Now I'm looking for the only one, right? I'm looking for the person who is okay. I can't find them. I can't find them. I really can't. I can't find people who have not had something horrible happen to them, right? And that does not negate my experience, your experience, anybody's experience. I'm just saying that from what I see, this is a common issue. Others have it worse. Others have more horrible experiences or different experiences, right? That does not negate anybody's individualistic experience. There you go. That's the word I can pronounce. But it's a serious issue, and I see it, and I think that that is the true issue, right? And even for me, the trauma thing, that the trauma work, that is some difficult stuff, and to really work on that and to let your brain process that it's okay. I mean, that's you talk about something, right? That's where that word trigger really comes in. Trigger, where you get triggered. That is something that is very serious and very real that I've seen happen even with myself, right? And sometimes it's little things, right? I can't have someone come up from behind me, right, and put
Yes.
their shoulder on my back. I can't do that because if it does, I flinch every single time. It's involuntary, right? I don't mean to do it. I don't want to do it. I tried to work on it. Every single time, it's like I flinch, and it it's not good. And that's one of the things that I work on in therapy is how do I address this? Well, what causes that? And those are the things that really affect you. And it makes sense as a young child when you're growing and developing, you grow up and your brain's susceptible for this, right? You're getting programmed. And back in the day, man, they didn't know. For the most part, they didn't know any of this. So what's happened is that these generational illnesses or behaviors, the epigenetic thing has gone down, right? And it's just continued, continued, continued. And to really stop it, which is what a lot of us have done, is something that is really brave to say, I'm not going to continue to pass this down. I'm going to at least try to address this to do something different. And I see that more and more. I see people who are starting to break the cycle, who are starting to become aware of how mental health issues can affect people from day to day, how certain behavioral health issues can affect others. And I think that that's good. And I think you did a great job at that. So, yeah.
I mean, I mean, I agree with all that. And for me, I did a lot of work. I did individual therapy, and then for several years, and then for several years, I was in a group therapy with women with trauma histories. And boy, was that eye opening. I mean, really, I had no idea. I knew the big reactions like the jumping, but I had no idea how many of my smaller behaviors were actually trauma response behaviors until that group. And then I did do medication for about 3.5 years, and then I was able to go off. The other thing on this topic, I will say, so She Recovers Foundation, I'm on the board for She Recovers. She Recovers isn't just for recovery from substance use disorder, it's also recovery from trauma, mental health, behavioral disorders like eating disorders, or video overuse, or sex addiction, or any of those kind of things, grief, self-harm, all of those things are all together in She Recovers. And the reason is because most women with a substance use disorder have one or more of those other areas that they need to work on as well, that they're in recovery from. And so in She Recovers, you don't have to silo. I talk about my substance use disorder here and my eating disorder there and my trauma here. It's all in one place. And so that's a different approach, a different model for recovery that's a lot of women find really valuable. It's actually pretty large. We have about 325,000 members, and we have a a Facebook page, a private group, which is very supportive. We have meetings. There are some face-to-face meetings around the country, but a lot of it's on the internet. We have yoga and dance. They like that mind-body connection. So there's yoga and dance and She Recovers. And so it's a good organization for the women to take a look at, especially if they have some other issues they want to work on, like trauma, mental health, or other behavioral disorders.
What do you think? And what you just said really brought something up in my memory. I've noticed that in my time in this field, that there has been some inadequacies when it comes to care, right? Um, Certain people may get better access to treatment and to care than others. Specifically, where I was at, right? There was a large African American population, and there was less care there for those individuals than for others. And I wanted to know, and specifically when you mentioned She Recovers, I know that, I mean, this is an unfortunate truth, but if you look at it, if you look at the big book, right, you know, the Our Wives section, To Our Wives section, right, you know, that's the infamous one that really gets people. There is some built-in discrimination, right? This is my view, right? My personal view, and I see it because anybody who can take a look at that big book, right? As much as I love that book, there's some antiquated terms in there. It was done in the 30s, predominantly patriarchal society, right? What do you think we can do to maybe open the fields of recovery for folks, right? For people who are maybe in ad, uh, marginalized communities, right? Because one of the aspects of Chatham County and Siler City is over 60% Hispanic, right? We are just it's a massive population, and there's so little treatment for that community. And I think it would be nice to have more integration, more access to treatment. The only thing we have right now is a AA group that is in Spanish, and they do a fantastic job. But I would love to see more integration where more folks come from this community, that community, so we can start to really address these serious issues. And that goes for mental health too. I'm not just talking about substance abuse. I'm talking about mental health treatment because there's a lot of stigma around that.
Yeah, I mean, America as a whole has an inequitable healthcare system in general, right? I mean, with the private focus on insurance, and depending on what state you live in, your access to low cost or affordable care, or some insurance varies. I mean, California is better than some of the states in other places. But also the access is an issue. And I think the one thing that's nice about having the online option is that for some people, it actually is better. People who are, let's say, working more than one job and don't have a lot of time to get to a face-to-face meeting can do an online meeting. I know She Recovers has special groups. For example, women who are caring for high needs children. There's a group for those women on She Recovers. LifeRing has a special group for veterans. We have one for people with chronic health conditions. We have Spanish speaking meetings. She Recovers does too. But it is a disparate availability in a lot of areas. It's not equal treatment, especially for going into rehab. We're trying to get into a intensive outpatient program. Financial constraints are problematic. I mean, I didn't have insurance when I was looking for treatment, and I didn't have any cash, and I had to wait 10 weeks. I had to call every Monday between 9 and noon for 10 weeks to keep my name on the list until it went to the top. That's not a good approach for someone who's got a substance use disorder. I was proud that I managed to call for 10 weeks. Like, that was an accomplishment. But a lot of people, their name will get halfway and then they drop to the bottom again because they missed a week. And it's just, we don't have enough low cost, affordable care in mental health in general, but it's also for substance use. And it's definitely problematic. I mean, the truth is, we've also overcriminalized substance use, right? And that has a discriminatory approach. I mean, a person of color is much more likely, for example, even though the rates of drug use are very similar between the white population and people of color are more likely to get stopped, more likely to get searched if they're stopped, to get arrested if they're searched. The charges tend to be higher and the sentencing is higher. So at every step of that process, there's a negative discriminatory impact on people of color. And so they end up in jail. Well, jail's a lot more expensive than treatment. Why don't we instead take some of that money and make sure that those communities, not that they have a disproportionate problem, but at least they have equal access, to treatment. We could save a lot if we would take those criminalizing jail and prison dollars and put them into mental health care. And it would be better for society. It'd be better for the individual, and it would be better for society because it would actually be cheaper.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's something that we need to do. And you would think it'd be more common sense approach, right? You would think it'd be a common sense approach because ultimately this is something that is going to benefit everybody. It's going to
Yes.
take this. It makes no sense when you look at it from our perspective, from my perspective, that they would not engage in this. And I'm talking about the government, the state government, the federal government engage in severe funding because this is killing people in mass, and we have these cultural issues that are impacting everybody. It's in all different forms of community, and it's just when we're together, it's better than when we're apart, right? When we are addressing the issue head on, that is just a beautiful thing. And I think that if we move more towards that and are more inclusive, I'm talking about multilingual translation services, right? That's what we need too. We need to have a Spanish translation service. We need to have people who can really be in here because this is something that is not, people are not going to go away. This is not going to happen. This is going to continue to happen. It's going to continue to get worse because there's systematic issues that are happening, and you see it. I know you see it. You're on the front lines, or at least you were, right? I mean, you have to see how bad this is, and and I'm glad that we have things like drug court and we have diversion programs. I think we just need more, and we need more funding for those programs because they're doing some great work. Matter of fact, I got a friend. She's a peer support specialist for an organization like a league, right? And she just now got a couple of assistants, and those assistants are packed, right? I mean, she has so much work that she was doing that the the county hired two more folks for her, and they're maxed out. So you just see how much work there is and how much workload and how much access we need, right? Because one of the aspects of peer support is that you can do a community service team, right? You can do an ACT team where you go out into the community and you actually go to people where there are, especially in rural counties like most of North Carolina, where you can go 30 minutes and go get treatment and give somebody life-saving treatment where they normally wouldn't get it because that's another aspect, right? There's a lot of areas all across this state. There's a lot of land in the United States, and people don't realize that. And people live, sometimes people live out in the boondocks. I mean, people live all the way out there, all the way out there in the mountains, all the way at the coast. And it, sometimes they don't have a car. I mean, you're talking about people who are just suffering immensely. And we need to, these, look, it doesn't matter what you have, okay? A person's a person. I mean, one of the aspects that I saw about Asheville is that there was an immense people experiencing houselessness problem, right? I learned the correct terms too, and I'm glad I did. Um, and really, there's a lot of people who are experiencing houselessness. And I mean, I would go and I would volunteer at food pantry. One of the food pantries was called ABCCM, and I would volunteer there. I've also volunteered at Least of These, this little pop-up place in Asheville, there by the ABCCM food pantry. And you see folks, and some people are just getting out there. Some people are ready to get out. Some people got their tent stolen. I mean, it's just these are people and they deserve to be treated as such, regardless of their living conditions. And you see how there's policy in place that can do the opposite to that. And that's really frustrating for me because I see myself. I mean, I can see how there goes me, right? There goes me. If I didn't have someone who sent me to rehab, or if I didn't have insurance, I'm gonna have to go to either a free program, right? And get kicked out at the slightest inconvenience, because that happens a lot in those programs, right? Let's be honest about that. Or I just live on the streets, right? And I mean, it's difficult. And you think about it from the parents' perspective. A lot of parents are terrified to kick their children out of the house, right? When it comes to this, or not do an intervention, or not try to get them help, or set in place some boundaries, because they're terrified. Once again, we got the fear into coming. Fear, fear, fear. And they're terrified that they're going to overdose and die, right? Or they're going to go out in the streets and die. So I think we need more action to this, and that's why, I mean, when we upload this episode, I'll include links to all your advisory board stuff. I mean, the She Recovers, we'll do Life Ring, we'll do everything. And I just want to, I'm going to give you some time at this to share whatever you want, but I just want to say thank you for coming on. I really appreciate that. I'm inviting you back on because I would love to have you on again. I think you share so much. We didn't really get to touch on your writing. You've done a lot of writing for major publications. Maybe we can touch on a little bit on that if you don't mind. Can you expand some on some of the writing you've done around this subject?
Sure. So I've had pieces, essays in different publications, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times. I have a essay in Recovery Today magazine, which is free online, the December edition, and I have links to those on my website, which is junkie2judge.com. Also, my book, of course, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. My memoir is actually 30% about recovery. 30% of the book is about how I built a personal recovery plan, what my thought process was, how I attacked it, the different programs that I attended, how I synthesized it. And in the back, I have some guidelines, some things to think about as you're looking at where you are and what next steps might be. And then a checklist that, particularly if someone's thinking that they're just beginning the process of trying to get help, the checklist can sort of help them think it through. So it's not just a horrible story. I went to a couple meetings, I got sober. It's actually 30% of the book is recovery focused. And then also through my website, people can send me a message. I answer all messages that I get, and that's on my website. And then on Twitter, I try to provide good information, thoughts about recovery, and sort of the science, the studies, the new topics. And I am at Mary Beth O _. And so those are all good ways to reach me.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I'm so thankful, and we're close to the holiday season, so I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on here and do this. This is part of the first season of our podcast. We will be distributing this, and we hope everybody in Chatham County and abroad sees this, because this is something that people need to hear, right? We're all about these discussions, and like, I mean, I can't thank you enough. I really can't, for taking the time out of your day to come on here. I saw you on Twitter. I was like, I mean, I love the way you were promoting your stuff, because that's how I would do it. And I'm like, I get that. I get that. I get that. I get that. I get what you were doing, and I appreciate it, because that's how you get the word out. And look, I'm gonna buy a copy of it as well. I got it in my cart, but I'm going to buy a copy of Junkie to Judge. I'm excited to read it. I recommend everybody check it out. I mean, it sounds like we've just got a little bit, and there's more that's in there. And you know what? Actually, matter of fact, I would love to have you on once I read the full thing, and we can discuss it more in depth. I'm really thrilled that you spent time to come on here. So thank you so much. As always, guys, you can follow us at Chatham Podcast on all social media platforms. We are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. We're even on Rumble. We're on all the major social media platforms. And I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to share, Mary Beth?
Thanks for having me. And, just let me know when you read the book and we'll talk.